They were not costumes. That is the first thing you need to understand. A costume is something you put on and take off. What James Bryan Hellwig wore across 20 years of professional wrestling were skins. 14 of them. Each one was designed to project something the man inside could not project on his own. Immortality, supernatural danger, a personal philosophy of life that he called destrucity, psychological warfare. And as the body aged, the skin got heavier, more elaborate, more desperate. Before there were coats, there was a body. Jim Hellwig had come up through the territories under the name Justice, working as part of a tag team called Power Team USA, and later with a group called the Freedom Fighters. He had the kind of physique that stopped conversations in a room, the kind that made Vince McMahon pay attention. But in those early days, the physique was the entire act. There was no face paint, there was no mythology. There was just muscle and energy and a pair of arm tassels. He teamed briefly with Steve Borden, a man who would eventually become Sting in WCW, under the tag name The Blade Runners. Later, working in world-class championship wrestling in Texas, he became the Dingo Warrior. Still no coat. Still just the tassels, the body, and the speed. Then the WWF came calling. The character became the Ultimate Warrior, and the tassels gave way to something much larger. The tassels had worked because the character was built on velocity, and at some point someone had the idea to put the warrior in a coat. Not just any coat, an airbrushed duster. A floor-length canvas of satin and mythology, hand-painted with imagery that told a story before a single punch was thrown. These were not rack items from a department store. These were commissioned pieces, built for a specific man, a specific character, and a specific moment in time. From that point forward, the coats and the career became one story. Number 1. WrestleMania 7. Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena, March 24th, 1991. By this point, the Ultimate Warrior was the WWF champion. He had beaten Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 6 in Toronto in what many considered the most electric title match of that era. He was the chosen successor to the most popular performer in the business's history. But Randy Savage cost Warrior the WWF Championship at the 1991 Royal Rumble, interfering on behalf of Sergeant Slaughter. And for this particular night, the stakes were even higher. His match against Savage was a retirement match, a career versus career stipulation. The loser would be forced to leave professional wrestling forever, or so the story went. The Warrior understood this on the night of WrestleMania 7 in a way that went beyond the match itself. He understood it through the coat. For the first time, he did something that no one who had watched him perform expected. He did not sprint to the ring. He walked, slowly, deliberately, as if the weight of what was about to happen was physically pressing down on him. The coat carried that weight visually in a way that words alone could not. On the reverse side, there were dual portraits, one of the Warriors, one of Randy Savage. Two rivals, two men whose careers hung in the balance of one night, printed together on the same garment as if they were already joined by fate. This was psychological warfare in fabric form, because those two men, bitter enemies on that night in March 1991, would eventually team together as the Ultimate Maniacs. The coat predicted the alliance before either man had publicly considered it. That is not an accident. That is a performer who understood his own mythology well enough to write the next chapter into his entrance attire. Number 2. SummerSlam 1991. 5 months later, the Warrior came back with a different energy entirely. The retirement match was behind him, and now he was standing alongside Hulk Hogan in one of the most star-powered tag team matches the WWF had ever assembled. The two biggest names in the company, teaming together against what the promotion called the Triangle of Terror: Sergeant Slaughter, General Adnan, and Colonel Mustafa. The coat for this night reflected the shift in tone perfectly. Where coat number 1 had been somber and heavy with meaning, coat number 2 was neon-maximalist. It maintained the same floor-length silhouette that had been established at WrestleMania, the same physical gravity, but the palette came back to life. Vibrant colors, aggressive energy. This was a celebration, a victory lap, a visual declaration that the most charismatic performer in the company had survived his greatest test and come out the other side still burning. Together, Hogan and the Warrior represented a specific moment in WWF history that would never be replicated. Two performers whose combined popularity had defined an entire decade, standing in the same corner, wearing their mythology on the outside for an arena packed with true believers. Coat number 2 did not carry a complicated story. Coat number 2 was the party. Number 3. SummerSlam 1992, Wembley Stadium, London. By 1992, the relationship between James Hellwig and the WWF had become complicated. The Warrior was a difficult man to work with. He had walked out on the company over contract disputes, but the audience still wanted him. SummerSlam 1992 took place in front of what was at that point the largest crowd in European wrestling history. The Warrior was challenging Randy Savage for the WWF Championship, a rematch of WrestleMania 7, but without the retirement stipulation and without the emotional weight of that earlier match. For this night, the Warrior made a choice that surprised everyone. He wore both a duster and a muscle singlet simultaneously. The singlet was not ordinary athletic wear. It featured airbrushing that created what the document describing these garments calls a torn skin effect. The impression was of a body in the process of breaking open, of a human form that could no longer contain whatever was inside it. The duster over the singlet provided the superheroic frame. The singlet provided the disturbing interior. The airbrushing on the back again references the match with Warrior, Savage, Flair, and Perfect, all in the back surrounding the WWE title. Hellwig would depart the WWF not long after. The backstage tensions had not resolved. The contractual problems had not gone away. Number 4. WrestleMania 12, Anaheim, California, 1996. 4 years passed. When the Warrior came back, the world had changed around him. It was 1996. The WWF was losing the Monday Night War to WCW. Ted Turner's promotion had launched Monday Nitro as a direct competitor to Monday Night Raw, running head-to-head in the same time slot, and WCW was winning the ratings battle. The WWF needed names. It needed nostalgia. It brought back the Ultimate Warrior. The opponent at WrestleMania 12 was Hunter Hearst Helmsley, a young performer who would eventually become one of the most powerful men in the wrestling business, but who, at this particular moment in 1996, was being used as a showcase opponent, a vehicle for the Warrior's return rather than a genuine threat to it. Coat number 4 was something new and something extraordinary. Royal blue, vibrant red, and yellow. A palette that felt simultaneously like a superhero uniform and a comic book cover. The design incorporated turquoise accents, a color that Hellwig had specifically selected because, in his personal philosophy, turquoise represented life and vitality. This was not a stylist's choice. This was a man building his own symbolic language into the fabric. But the most striking element of this duster was its central motif. On the coat, there was a comic book-style illustration of the Warrior himself, a performer wearing his own image into battle, turning himself into his own symbol, a myth referring to itself. This detail says something important about where the character was at this point. The man inside the coat was aging, The body was not what it had been at WrestleMania 6. The heavy, elaborate garment served a practical function, masking the physical changes that the years had produced. But the imagery on the coat was doing something beyond concealment. It was creating a recursion. A character so fully formed that he could wear his own mythology like a shield and dare the audience to look through it. The 1996 return was not the commercial success the WWF had hoped for. But coat number 4 from WrestleMania 12 remains one of the most visually complete garments of the entire career. Number 5. In your house. Good friends, better enemies. The opponent was Goldust. Goldust, performed by Dustin Rhodes, was one of the most genuinely unsettling characters in WWF history. The gold body paint, the platinum wig, the cinematic entrance, and the deliberately ambiguous and provocative psychological manipulation. Goldust was a character designed to disturb, and he was very good at it. He was also visually one of the most saturated performers in the business. Coat number 5 was designed to prevent exactly that. The airbrushing was maximal. The colors were loud and dense and layered. The garment was built to be an elemental force of nature, standing opposite a cinematic one. While WrestleMania 12 was blue, this event was green and had a comic book airbrush style, with Warrior standing staring at you like a predator at its prey. In wrestling language, when a performer commands the full attention of an audience, they are said to be over. Coat number 5 ensured the Warrior remained over, even against one of the most visually overwhelming performers of the decade. Number 6. King of the Ring, 1996. The storyline with Jerry the King Lawler included a physical angle in which Lawler was scripted to smash a framed photograph over the Warrior's head. During a Monday Night Raw taping on June 10th of that year, the Warrior incorporated a new element into his entrance attire: a comic logo baseball cap. That specific outfit, which the Warrior hadn't worn on television before and would never wear again, was a massive giveaway to the audience. It made it completely obvious where the angle was heading. The hero was padding himself in advance for a planned broken glass stunt. The Ultimate Warrior and Jerry Lawler finally settled their feud by squaring off in a singles grudge match at the 1996 King of the Ring PPV. For his final WWE PPV match, Warrior had a very unique look: all purple gear and purple duster, on the back of which appears the custom figure based on the Warrior comic. In theory, the match was a solid attraction, since it was the first time these two massive stars faced off. But Warrior wasn't known for his technical wrestling. His best matches relied heavily on huge storylines and being mapped out in advance. Meanwhile, Lawler was getting older, and his classic matches usually required a level of intense crowd heat that this feud just didn't have. Number 7. Monday Night Raw, July 9th, 1996. The opponent that night was Owen Hart, one of the most technically gifted performers in the history of the business, and, by any reasonable measure, one of the finest in-ring workers the WWF ever employed. This match, as it turned out, would be the last time the Ultimate Warrior appeared on WWF television for the rest of the decade. No announcement was made, no farewell. The coat for this match, built in the vibrant primary colors that had defined the entire 1996 run, became an exit point that neither the audience nor, perhaps, the performer himself recognized as final in the moment. He had never worn his signature coat outside of a PPV event before. As a cool detail, the painted design on the back of the duster was a direct copy of the Warrior #1 comic cover. The 1996 run had been turbulent. The return had not produced the ratings boost the company needed. The character, for all its visual power, felt slightly out of place in a product that was changing in real time. Within weeks, James Hellwig, was gone from the WWF. This concludes the second era of his 1996 return, capping the Ultimate Warrior's duster count at 7. Going forward, his ring gear evolved significantly. While the earlier coats were sleeveless and ended just below the knee, all of his future dusters were long-sleeved and full-length. Number 8. WCW Nitro debut. In 1998, WCW was America's biggest and most chaotic wrestling promotion. Eric Bischoff built this empire by boldly signing massive stars like Hogan, Savage, Hall, and Nash to form the legendary NWO. The NWO's rebellious attitude was the creative lightning bolt that sent WCW to the top. But by 1998, the concept was stretched thin, and the creative team lacked direction. On top of that, powerful stars like Hulk Hogan refused to participate in any storylines that made them look weak. Into this atmosphere arrived James Hellwig, repackaged as simply the Warrior. The rebranding was deliberate. Gone was the ultimate prefix. In its place came the One Warrior Nation, the OWN, a counter-faction built explicitly as a response to the NWO. And the debut coat reflected all of this. Where the WWF coats had been bright and primary and superheroic, coat number 8 was gritty, deeper shadows in the airbrushing, more aggressive imagery. The duster, blue jeans, and white cowboy boots were a nice combination. Number 9. OWN White Duster. Fall Brawl 98 War Games match. The white OWN duster was part of a massive production. In 1998, WCW wanted everything to look huge. To match the NWO and Hollywood Hogan, Warrior needed a supernatural entrance. They used a trapdoor and smoke so he could magically appear in the ring like a ghost. But this setup was actually very dangerous. At Fall Brawl, the trapdoor broke and caused a severe injury to the British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith that changed his life and career forever. This white coat was covered completely in his signature logos, making it the first duster to feature just symbols instead of painted faces. He wore it on back-to-back episodes of Nitro, including the September 14th show, where he took the Disciple hostage. It also made an appearance at Fall Brawl 98, when the Renegade wore it to act as a decoy during War Games. But what makes this duster truly legendary is its final appearance. Warrior wore it to the ring for the very last match of his life in June 2008, when he returned after 10 years to win the NWE Championship. The Warrior himself faced a different problem inside the cage that night. The scripted exit did not execute the way it was planned. He physically kicked the cage structure until it gave way. Warrior is about 10 feet off the ground, so as he falls, anything but gracefully, to the floor, he is legitimately injured in the process. Number 10. White Comic OWN Flag Duster. The only Nitro match. During a tag team match with Sting against Hollywood Hogan and Bret Hart on Nitro, the Warrior wrestled the entire match without removing the duster. This is not standard practice. A floor-length coat restricts movement in ways that most performers would find intolerable. Taking the coat off before the match begins is standard procedure. The duster is for the entrance. The ring belongs to the athlete. The Warrior refused. The second white duster from his time in WCW is actually considered one of Warrior's personal favorites. He only wore it for 2 specific moments: the famous Nitro segment where only Hogan could see him in the mirror, and his only match on Nitro, where he teamed up with Sting against Hollywood Hogan and Bret Hart. Years later, Warrior brought this same duster back to wear in the WWE 2K14 video game commercial. His refusal has been interpreted in various ways. Critically, it is often cited as evidence of the creative dysfunction that characterized his WCW run. A performer is more invested in the look of the character than in the quality of the performance. Number 11. OWN Black Duster, the only WCW photo shoot. The OWN Black Duster was never used in a match. It was built for promotional photography. This detail matters because it tells you something about how seriously the OWN rebranding was being taken at the design level, even as the creative direction around it was becoming increasingly unstable. This brings us to the very first Black Duster of his career. A lot of fans actually confuse this one with the jacket he wore at Halloween Havoc. He brought this coat out for 2 different episodes of Nitro. First, he wore it to cut a promo in the ring. Then, he wore it on the night he hung out in the rafters, eventually revealing that the Disciple had joined the OWN. Just like the white version, this duster only featured his classic symbols, topped off with a massive OWN logo painted on the back. As a cool piece of trivia, this is the exact gear he wore for his only official WCW photo shoot, which landed on the cover of the October 1998 WCW magazine and became a poster the following month. Number 12. Halloween Havoc 1998, the final US match versus Hollywood Hogan. A lot of people think this was the Ultimate Warrior's last match. While he did wrestle one final time in Spain back in 2008, this was officially his last match in the United States. And honestly, it was pretty awful. The coat itself is packed with color. The back features a tombstone that says, "Here lies the NWO," right next to a painted Grim Reaper, clearly showing that he was there to kill off the group. He also wore this exact duster the very next night on Nitro to kick off the show with a promo. And then the match happened. The critics of this match, and there have been many over the years, focus on the in-ring performance, on the pacing, on the execution of the spots, on the physical limitations visible in both performers. What gets less attention is the structural problem that surrounds it. This was Hollywood Hogan's production. In 1998, Hulk Hogan, WCW, had what the wrestling industry calls creative control written into his contract. No one with that much political power in a promotion was going to let an opponent's supernatural mythology genuinely threaten their own position. The Warrior was gone from WCW within weeks. His American career was effectively over. Number 13. OWN Cattle Skulls Duster, never worn in WCW. There is a coat in a collector's archive somewhere that was manufactured by 2 of the most respected names in wrestling garment production, Chalkline and Fanimation. These were the gold standard builders for this kind of work. Their pieces were constructed with the kind of precision and craft that the word costume does not adequately describe. The airbrushed cattle skulls among Warrior's symbols are reminiscent of a set of trunks and knee pads he wore during his WCW days. It never appeared on WCW television. Not once. The chaotic, creative implosion of late 1998 WCW ended the Warrior's tenure before this garment could be introduced. Someone designed it. Someone built it. Someone paid for it. And then the opportunity to use it simply ceased to exist. Not because of injury or contract dispute, but because the promotion around it had descended into a kind of creative chaos that made planning nearly impossible. Number 14. The Always Believe Duster. WWE Raw, April 7th, 2014. James Bryan Hellwig walked down a WWE entrance ramp for the last time. He had been inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame the previous evening at WrestleMania 30 in New Orleans. He had given a speech in which he told the audience, with a precision that none of them recognized as ominous in the moment, that every man's heart one day beats its last beat. Coat number 14 was called the Always Believe Duster. On its sleeves, the words, "Always Believe," the mantra that had defined his relationship with his audience across 3 decades. On the reverse, a career-spanning montage. A garment designed to be a final document, a compression of everything the character had ever been, worn in one last walk to one last ring. Making his first WWE appearance in 18 years, Warrior actually walked out wearing a suit. But once he got to the ring, he grabbed his newest duster from underneath the apron and delivered the last and most iconic speech of his entire career. Underneath the coat, invisible to the crowd in the building and the millions watching at home, Hellwig was wearing a three-piece suit: jacket, vest, tie, complete. The tie was tight. The coat was heavy. You could see, if you were watching closely, the physical effort required to carry both the suit and the garment on top of it. You could see the toll it was taking on his body. This image, the man in the suit underneath the myth, is the most honest in the entire story of these 14 coats. Coat number 14 concealed nothing. The mortal man was visible beneath it. The suit, the human uniform, the ordinary garment of an ordinary life was right there under the mythology for anyone willing to look. 18 hours after that walk down the ramp, James Hellwig was dead. Heart failure. He was 54 years old. And in 14 different coats across 3 decades, that story was always the same one: that the myth is worth protecting, that the belief is worth carrying, that some things are, in fact, bigger than the gold. Always believe. If you grew up watching this man sprint down that aisle, if you felt something when that entrance music hit and the crowd exploded, then you already understand why these coats matter in a way that goes beyond wrestling history. They are a record of a career and a life, documented in satin and paint, built by craftsmen who took the mythology seriously enough to construct it by hand, one commission at a time. If that is the kind of storytelling you are looking for, subscribe to this channel right now. And before you go, we want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell us, which of these 14 coats hit hardest for you? Tell us. We read every single comment. And we will see you in the next one.